Inside prison kitchens, the truth about inmate meals, the rotten meat incident, the smell hit before anyone even saw it. Inside the prison kitchen, a pile of gray, slimy meat sat on a dented metal cart. Flies swarmed, buzzing over slabs that looked less like food and more like something pulled from a trash bin. An inmate worker hesitated, his hand trembling as he scooped the rotting chunks into a massive pot. Suddenly, one of the men gagged and collapsed, clutching his stomach. Guards rushed in, shouting for order, but it was too late. The kitchen had erupted in chaos. Inmates yelled that the food was poisoned. Pots were slammed over, trays crashed to the floor, and the truth about prison meals was no longer a secret kept behind bars. But how did it get this bad? How could meals meant to feed prisoners nearly kill them instead? Let's rewind. Behind the kitchen doors. Every prison has a kitchen. To the outside world, it looks ordinary. Stainless steel counters, giant pots, trays stacked high. But inside, the story is different. The kitchen is run mostly by inmates, with only a few guards watching. These workers chop vegetables, stir soup, and serve food to hundreds, sometimes thousands, of prisoners a day. For many, it's the closest thing to a job they'll ever have on the inside. But the conditions? They're shocking. Floors are greasy. Roaches crawl near the storage rooms, and ingredients often come in dented cans with labels scratched off. Some days, meals are stretched with powdered eggs and watered-down milk just to make portions last. At first, inmates put up with it. Food was never supposed to be gourmet. But one night, while unloading a delivery truck, they noticed something strange. Boxes of meat stamped with an expiration date that had already passed. The kitchen boss told them to cook it anyway, and that's when everything started to spiral. Boiling point. The spoiled meat didn't just smell bad. It made inmates sick. Dozens complained of stomach pain, dizziness, and vomiting. Word spread fast through the cell blocks that the kitchen was feeding them garbage. Tempers rose. Some prisoners whispered about refusing meals, while others talked about taking the kitchen over. Guards tried to dismiss it as exaggeration, but everyone knew the truth. The kitchen had become a battlefield. One night, an inmate slipped something sharp into his sleeve before heading to his shift. Another smuggled in a handful of bleach packets from the laundry room. Rumors swirled. Someone was planning to sabotage the food. The tension was thick. Every clang of a pot sounded like a warning bell. And then it happened. During the next meal service, a guard took the first bite from the pot and immediately spat it out, blood mixing with soup as he clutched his mouth. The kitchen had turned violent. The first strike, the guard staggered back, spitting blood as the chow hall went silent, his face twisted in shock. Someone had slipped razor shards into the stew. Within seconds, chaos erupted. Trays flew across the room. Inmates pounded on the tables, chanting for better food, their voices echoing like thunder through the hall. Guards rushed in with batons, shouting for everyone to sit down, but the kitchen was already out of control. For days after, tension hung heavy over the prison. The warden announced stricter kitchen checks, but inmates laughed at the idea. They knew the spoiled meat and rotten ingredients weren't mistakes. They were policy. Food was being used as punishment. But then came a low moment. The rebellion faded. Inmates who had joined the protests were thrown into solitary confinement. Kitchen workers were threatened. Cook what they're given or face the whole. The meals continued, worse than before. Mystery meat patties, moldy bread, and Nutriloaf, a brick of tasteless food given to troublemakers. The hunger grew, and so did the anger. And then came the next spark. The food fight. It started small. One inmate tossed his tray on the floor in disgust. Another followed, slamming his cup of watered-down milk at the wall. Within minutes, the chow hall transformed into a war zone. Soup splattered across ceilings, bread rolls flew like stones, and guards were caught in the middle of a full-blown food riot. Inmates screamed that they were being poisoned, while guards swung their batons, dragging men to the ground. In the chaos, someone managed to set a trash can on fire. Smoke filled the kitchen as alarms blared, forcing everyone to the yard. Prisoners cheered. The food protest had turned into a prison-wide rebellion. But when the smoke cleared, punishment came swift and brutal. Entire blocks were locked down, privileges cut, and kitchen access sealed. Still, one question remained. What exactly was in that food? Because whispers spread that it wasn't just spoiled meat anymore. It was something far worse. What's in the food? After the riot, the prison was locked down. Meals were pushed through cell slots in silence. But inmates began to notice strange things. Some trays carried meat that looked green around the edges. Others contained bread, so hard it could chip a tooth. And then came the discovery that changed everything. In one serving of stew, an inmate found a cockroach floating on the surface. In another, someone pulled out a shard plastic. Word spread fast. Prisoners whispered that the kitchen wasn't just careless, it was intentional. They believed they were being served trash, scraps not fit for animals. Guards shrugged it off, saying the inmates were exaggerating. But when one man collapsed after eating, foaming at the mouth, even the staff couldn't deny it anymore. Still, the low point came next. Medical help was slow, the sick inmate was dragged away, and the kitchen kept serving. Days blurred into weeks. Hunger forced prisoners to eat whatever was placed before them. Complaints were ignored. But deep inside the kitchen, an inmate worker discovered something no one could ignore: the secret storage room. One night, while taking out trash, an inmate slipped past a half-open door that guards usually kept locked. What he saw made his stomach twist. Inside the storage room, boxes of food sat piled to the ceiling. Labels read, "Not for human consumption." Some boxes were ripped open, filled with spoiled beans crawling with maggots. Bags of rice were chewed open by rats. In the corner, barrels of mystery meat leaked dark liquid onto the floor. He grabbed a piece of torn packaging, hid it under his shirt, and smuggled it back to the block. When other inmates read the words printed on it, "Animal feed only," the prison exploded with fury. That night, fists pounded cell doors. Prisoners screamed for answers, shaking the bars until the whole tier rattled. The truth was out. They weren't being fed food at all. They were being dumped scraps unfit for dogs. And that discovery was about to set off something even deadlier than a food riot. Whispers of revenge. The discovery spread to the prison like wildfire. From cell block to yard, inmates whispered about the words stamped on that package: "Animal feed only." For a moment, things quieted down. Prisoners watched their trays carefully. Some refusing to eat, others trading food like contraband. A few tried to survive on commissary snacks, ramen noodles, candy bars, instant coffee, but most couldn't afford it. Hunger gnawed at them every night. The guards noticed the silence. They thought the anger had died down, but in reality, it was boiling under the surface. Inside the kitchen, a group of inmate workers began plotting. They were tired of stirring pots filled with filth. They wanted to strike back. One man sharpened a spoon into a blade. Another pocketed packets of hot pepper and bleach, whispering about making a meal for the guards. Then came the spark. An officer forced a sick inmate to finish his tray, laughing as he gagged. The room froze. Prisoners stared in disbelief, rage burning in their eyes. And at that moment, the plan for revenge began to take shape. The poisoned pot. The kitchen was buzzing the next morning. Giant pots boiled on the stoves, steam clouding the air. But this time, something different was happening behind those walls. A handful of inmates slipped crushed glass into one pot, bleach into another. They stirred slowly, covering their tracks, waiting for the guards' taste test. It wasn't just about spoiled food anymore. This was war. The first guard dipped a ladle, lifted it to his lips, and froze. The smell was wrong. The taste was sharper, bitter. He spat it out, glaring at the inmates. Then chaos. Pots overturned. Inmates lunged at the guard with ladles, trays, and sharpened utensils. The kitchen clanged like a battlefield. Guards swung batons. Radios crackled with calls for backup, and sirens howled through the blocks. Blood splashed across the tiles. Shouts echoed through the kitchen. The prison had erupted again, this time not just over food, but survival. And in the middle of the chaos, one inmate managed to escape the kitchen, clutching something he stole from the storage room. Something that would prove the corruption once and for all. The evidence. Through the smoke and screaming, one inmate sprinted down the hallway, clutching a torn package he had hidden under his shirt. Guards tackled others. But he slipped away into the cell blocks, shoving the paper into a friend's hands before being dragged down. When prisoners unfolded it, they saw the proof in black letters. Not for human consumption, animal feed only. Gasps echoed through the tier. The rumors were no longer rumors. This was evidence. Proof that the prison system was knowingly feeding them garbage. For a brief moment, the block went eerily quiet. Some inmates stared at the paper, fists shaking. Others pressed it against the bars, screaming at guards, "Look at this! Look at what you're giving us." The guards ignored them, but they couldn't erase what everyone had just seen. The prison walls had contained a lot of secrets, but this one was now impossible to bury. Still, days dragged on. The evidence was hidden, passed from cell to cell, like a sacred relic. Everyone knew the warden would come for it eventually, and when the warden finally made his move, it lit the fuse for the next explosion. The warden's crackdown. Late at night, the sound of boots thundered down the tier. The warden himself entered, flanked by officers in riot gear. They went cell to cell, demanding the package, tearing apart mattresses, flipping over buckets and belongings. When they didn't find it, punishment came hard. Dozens of inmates were dragged to solitary, beaten along the way. Commissary was cut off. Yard time vanished. For weeks, the prison lived in silence, broken only by the clanging of cell doors. It was the lowest point yet, hunger, isolation, and fear. But the evidence wasn't gone. It was hidden in plain sight, taped under a bunk where the officers had missed it, and the inmates who protected it had no intention of keeping it secret forever, because one of them had a plan: smuggle it out of the prison walls. And that plan would turn the entire prison upside down. The smuggling plan. The package couldn't stay inside forever. Everyone knew if the warden found it, it would vanish, and the truth would die with it. So, a plan was born. One inmate, a kitchen worker trusted to deliver trash to the outside dumpsters, volunteered. If he could tape the evidence under one of the bins, maybe a prison visitor or staff member sympathetic to the inmates would find it. Another suggested slipping it inside a library book that got passed back to volunteers. Every idea carried a deadly risk. Getting caught meant solitary, or worse. But the hunger, the sickness, the humiliation of being fed garbage, it was worth the gamble. For days, they waited for the right chance. Finally, one morning, the kitchen worker tucked the folded paper inside his waistband and headed toward the trash run. His heart pounded as he neared the gates. But just as he passed through the kitchen doors, 2 guards stepped in front of him, blocking the way. Caught in the act, the guards stared him down. "What are you hiding?" one barked. The inmate froze, sweat dripping down his neck. They yanked him aside, patting him down roughly. The paper crinkled. The guard's hand reached toward his waistband, when suddenly the kitchen erupted behind them. Pots clanged, inmates shouted, and trays flew through the air. A distraction. The guards turned, shouting for backup. In the chaos, the inmate bolted, slipping through the service door. He ripped the package free and shoved it deep inside a trash bag, burying it under food scraps and grease. Moments later, officers stormed the yard, dragging men down, beating them into submission. The inmate who carried the evidence was thrown face first to the ground. His ribs cracked under a boot. But by then, the trash bag was already loaded onto the truck. The proof was leaving the prison, and once it got out, there would be no turning back. The leak. The trash truck rumbled out of the gates, loaded with scraps and filth. No one inside the prison thought twice about it. But hidden among the rotting leftovers was a folded piece of packaging, the words still clear: "Not for human consumption." Hours later, at the city dump, a worker sorting through the garbage spotted the paper. Curious, he wiped it clean and read the label. His jaw dropped. He had heard rumors about the prison feeding inmates spoiled food, but this was proof. Instead of tossing aside, he slipped it into his jacket. That night, he showed it to his cousin, a local reporter who had been chasing prison corruption stories for months. The reporter's eyes lit up. This was a smoking gun. By morning, headlines screamed across local news: "Prison meals meant for animals." Inside the prison, radios buzzed with the news. Guards whispered nervously, and inmates pounded their doors in celebration. For the first time, The outside world was listening. But the warden? He wasn't celebrating. He was planning revenge. Lockdown, the warden stormed to the prison like a man possessed. Every block was locked down, every inmate treated as if they had smuggled the evidence themselves. Meals were reduced to the infamous Nutriloaf, a flavorless brick of mashed up beans, bread, and vegetables. Guards shoved it through slots 3 times a day. No choice, no variety, no dignity. It was survival at its lowest point. Some inmates broke down, refusing to eat. Others grew angrier, scratching messages into the walls. "We are not animals." But deep inside, the prisoners knew the warden crackdown meant one thing. He was scared. The truth had gotten out, and now the prison administration was scrambling to hide the rest. Still, the pressure cooker couldn't hold forever, because one night, in the middle of that brutal lockdown, the kitchen burst into violence again, this time deadlier than before. The breaking point, the lockdown stretched for weeks. Inmates were starving, forced to swallow the same tasteless Nutriloaf brick every single day. The kitchen became a graveyard of silence, just trays sliding under doors, no voices, no choices. But pressure like that doesn't just fade. It explodes. One night, the silence shattered. In the kitchen, an inmate worker snapped. He hurled a pot across the floor, screaming that he wouldn't cook garbage anymore. Others joined in, slamming knives on counters, smashing trays, tossing spoiled food against the walls. When guards rushed in, they were met with fury. Inmates armed themselves with ladles, boiling water, and sharpened utensils. The small riot spread like fire, spilling into the chow hall. Alarms blared. Radios crackled. The prison went on full emergency. But the chaos didn't stop at food fights. This time, someone went down. A guard collapsed, blood seeping through his uniform, and the kitchen floor turned into a battlefield. The price of silence. The aftermath was brutal. Guards stormed the blocks with shields, dragging inmates out one by one. Shackled and bleeding, many were thrown into solitary cells so small they could barely stretch their arms. The warden made an announcement over the intercom. "This prison will not be controlled by lies, violence, or propaganda. You will eat what you are given." But those words only fueled more rage. Inmates knew now that their voices meant nothing inside these walls. If change was to come, it had to come from outside. And then, just when hope seemed gone, something unexpected happened. A group of lawyers arrived at the gates, carrying copies of the leaked evidence and demanding answers. They wanted to see the kitchens, inspect the food, and interview inmates. The warden resisted, but pressure was mounting from the media, from families, and even from politicians. The kitchen, once hidden in shadows, was about to be dragged into the light. The day of the inspection arrived. For the first time in years, the kitchen doors swung open to outsiders. Lawyers, reporters, and inspectors stepped in, notebooks in hand, cameras flashing. At first, the warden tried to play it clean. Counters were scrubbed, pots polished, and food laid out to look fresh. But the smell told a different story. Behind the staged trays of bread and fruit, the stench of rot leaked from the storage rooms. When the inspectors demanded access to the freezers, guards hesitated. Finally, under pressure, they swung the doors open, revealing boxes covered in frostbite, mold, and labels scratched off. Some packages still carried the same words inmates had seen before. "Animal feed only." Reporters snapped photos. Lawyers demanded samples. The truth wasn't just whispered among inmates anymore. It was documented. But while the outside world was discovering the truth, inside the prison, the inmates paid the price for it. Backlash. The inspection ended, but the storm that followed was worse than anyone expected. That night, guards swept through the cell blocks. Doors slammed open. Flashlights blinded inmates, and men were dragged from bunks. Dozens were accused of helping smuggle the evidence. Beatings echoed down the halls, leaving prisoners bruised and broken. The warden made sure they got the message. Speaking out meant pain. Yet even through the fear, a spark of hope remained. Inmates had heard whispers that the photos from the inspection had already leaked to the press. The truth was spreading faster than the warden could silence it. The prison was boiling again. And in the chow hall the next morning, When guards pushed out trays of Nutriloaf and rotten stew, one inmate stood up, tray in hand, and hurled it straight at the officer's chest. The riot was back. The riot ignites. The tray slammed into the officer's chest, stew splattering across his uniform. For a split second, the chow hall froze. Then chaos erupted. Inmates leapt to their feet, flipping tables, hurling food, and charging at the guards. The air filled with the sound of shattering trays and shouted war cries. Guards swung batons wildly, but the prisoners outnumbered them. Kitchen workers poured boiling water. Others armed themselves with broken broom handles and sharpened utensils. Smoke bombs were fired. Tear gas rolled across the floor. But instead of scattering, inmates grew bolder. They tore off their shirts, wrapped them around their faces, and fought harder. The kitchen, the heart of their suffering, had become a battlefield. By the end of the night, dozens were injured. The floor was stained with blood and soup alike. And for the first time, the riot forced outside media helicopters to circle above the prison, capturing the smoke rising over the walls. The world was watching. Aftermath. When the sun rose, silence covered the prison like a blanket. The riot had been crushed, but the damage was everywhere. Broken tables, shattered glass, scorch marks from fires. The warden's voice crackled through the intercom. This prison is under full emergency lockdown. You will receive no yard, no visits, no privileges, until orders restored. For the inmates, it was another low. Days turned into nights with nothing but cold bricks of Nutriloaf shoved through the slots. Conversations were hushed. Hope seemed gone. But outside those walls, the story was growing. Reporters demanded answers about the food riots. Families of inmates rallied outside the prison, holding signs that read, "They are human," and "Stop feeding trash." Politicians began to speak out, calling for investigations. The warden thought the lockdown would bury the truth, but instead it had done the opposite. Every harsh move only fueled the fire outside. And deep in the kitchen, one final secret remained hidden, a discovery so shocking it would push the prison over the edge once more. The freezer of secrets. Weeks into the lockdown, a small team of kitchen workers was escorted back to clean the mess from the riot. Shackled at the ankles, they shuffled into the storage rooms. Guards barked orders, but one inmate's eyes locked on a heavy freezer in the corner. It looked different from the rest, rusted, chained shut, with a foul smell seeping from its edges. The guards avoided it, ordering the inmates to clean everything else first. That only made them more suspicious. When a guard turned his back, one prisoner bent down, slipping a bent spoon into the chain lock. With a twist, the metal snapped. The freezer door creaked open. Inside were slabs of meat, green, slimy, crawling with insects. But buried under the spoiled food was something worse. Black trash bags, dripping with rot. When one was torn open, the workers gagged. The bags weren't just filled with spoiled meat. They were stuffed with dead rats, rotten animal parts, and waste, stored right next to the food being cooked for inmates. The truth wasn't just ugly. It was monstrous. Whispers of death. The inmate workers staggered back, gagging, eyes wide. They had seen bad food before, but this was something else. This was poison disguised as meals. One of them whispered, "They're feeding us death." But before they could say another word, a guard slammed the freezer shut, locking the chain back in place. He growled, "You didn't see anything." The inmates were dragged out, beaten, and warned never to speak of it. Back in the blocks, word still spread. The workers whispered to others, telling them what was really in that freezer. The story spread faster than the guards could stop it. Soon, every cell knew. The prison kitchen wasn't just neglectful, it was a graveyard feeding them rot. That night, prisoners pounded the walls in unison, shouting, "We won't eat death." The chants echoed to the entire prison, bouncing off every tier. The warden knew the walls were crumbling, and he prepared his deadliest response yet. The warden's revenge. The chant shook the prison walls, echoing louder than any riot. "We won't eat death. We won't eat death." The warden heard every word. To him, it wasn't just defiance, it was war. At dawn, he unleashed his answer. Entire blocks were stormed by riot squads. Gas canisters hissed through the air, filling cells with choking clouds. Inmates coughed, gagged, pressed wet shirts to their faces, but the smoke was relentless. Those who resisted were dragged out, their bodies slammed against concrete floors. Batons cracked against skin. Screams cut through the hallways. And then came the punishment. Not food at all, but starvation rations, tiny portions of cold beans and stale bread, barely enough to survive. The warden wanted silence, and hunger was his weapon. For days, the prison sank into despair. Men grew weak. Some fainted in their cells. The noise of rebellion died down, replaced by groans of pain. But silence in prison is never permanent. The spark that wouldn't die. Even in the starvation, whispers crawled through the tears. Inmates spoke of the freezer, of the dead rats, of the truth that had already leaked outside. They told each other, "The world knows now. They can't hide it forever." One inmate, too weak to stand, scrawled words on his wall with a piece of broken tile. "We are not animals." Another used his last of energy to shout across the block, "They can starve us, but they can't bury the truth." That night, in the chow hall, the spark reignited. Guards slid trays of watery soup through, laughing under their breath. An inmate picked up his tray, stared at it, and smashed it on the ground. One by one, others followed. Trays shattered, food spilled across the floor, and voices rose again. The riot wasn't gone, it was waiting. And now, even starvation couldn't stop it. The prison was on the brink of its deadliest explosion yet. The final explosion. The chow hall was a war drum. Every crash of a tray, every shout from the cells was a signal. The prison had reached its breaking point. The next morning, it erupted. Inmates stormed the kitchen, overpowering the few guards stationed there. Pots of boiling water were hurled. Trays used as shields, and makeshift weapons flashed in the fluorescent light. Someone overturned a fryer, hot oil splattering across the floor. The smell of smoke, grease, and blood filled the air. The riot spread beyond the kitchen. Into corridors, cell blocks, even the yard. Sirens wailed. Helicopters circled overhead. From outside the walls, reporters captured plumes of black smoke rising from the prison like a warning flare. Inside, the inmates had only one demand: "We will not eat death." Their voices roared, echoing louder than the alarms. But the guards weren't backing down. Reinforcements poured in with shields, dogs, and tear gas. The kitchen had become a battlefield where survival meant everything. Blood on the tiles. The clash turned brutal. Tear gas hissed through the kitchen. Guards swung batons, cracking skulls and ribs. Inmates fought back with whatever they had. Knives carved from spoons, pans gripped like weapons, fists pounding with desperation. The floor turned slick with blood, mixing with spilled soup and grease. Screams echoed in every corner. Some inmates fell and didn't get up. Guards, too, were dragged down, beaten in the chaos. For hours, the prison shook with the sounds of war, metal slamming, radios blaring, bodies hitting the floor. And then, suddenly, silence. The riot was crushed, the kitchen destroyed, the prisoners shackled and dragged away. But the image of that bloody kitchen floor, stained with food and flesh, would never be erased. Because even though the rebellion had been broken, the truth had already escaped. The world now knew what really happened inside prison kitchens.